Hey QED coders, Michael L. Perry here. In the last video, I introduced you to historical modeling, and I showed you a really simple example, an ordering system where we have shipments and payments. And we used this example to show how we can keep track of things by just simply inserting shipments and payments and orders, as opposed to updating a status column. So this is how we can create an entire system with only inserts, no updates, no deletes. And now I'd like to go into a little bit more detail on how we can use a relational database to store a historical model. So let's concentrate on just this part of the model right here, where we've got our orders and our shipments. To keep track of this relationship between orders and shipments, we've got a foreign key. A shipment has an order ID, so we can keep track of which order was shipped. This also allows us to, given an order, query for all the shipments. So this foreign key relationship is very important, and it's how in a relational database you keep track of relationships like this. Now in a historical model, these things have special names. We like to call the things that the foreign key points to a predecessor. These are things that happened before. And then the thing that has the foreign key, the thing that's doing the pointing, is called the successor. It came after. So let's think about that. We had to have had an order before we could ship it. Well, in a relational database, you have to insert a parent record before you can get the ID to insert the child and give it the foreign key. If you didn't have the ID of the parent when you inserted the child, then you'd have to come back later and update the child record. And remember, updates are not allowed in a historical database. And so we've got the predecessor and the successor. Now, usually in a relational database, we use foreign keys to talk about cardinality. In a historical model, we use them to talk about causality. So what's the difference here? Cardinality is just how many you've got. So this is a one-to-many relationship. Now, that's interesting, but that's not the most important part. The most important part is the causality, which came first. The order came before the shipment. And so the order is the predecessor. Now, the word causality doesn't necessarily mean that the predecessor caused the successor. Now, in this case, it kind of does. You could say that when I place an order, that causes the company to ship a package to me. So causality in that sense is kind of there. But that's not necessarily going to be true. Causality in this formal definition simply means that there is some compelling reason that one thing had to have occurred before something else. And so we call the thing that had to have occurred first the predecessor, and then the thing that followed the successor. So that's all that causality means. And we're going to use foreign keys to capture causality relationships inside of our database. Now, let's take this one step further. Let's go ahead and talk about the customer for the order. So every order has a customer that placed the order, and a customer can place many orders. So we've got that cardinality. But the most important thing is the causality. We had to have established a customer relationship first, before we could take the very first order. And so that means that the customer is the predecessor for all of his orders. So we've got that predecessor-successor relationship again. Customer is the predecessor, and orders are the successor. Even though in a different relationship, order is the predecessor. So those terms refer to the sides of the relationship. Now, you may be wanting to add a few columns to this customer table. For example, let's keep track of the customer's name, or let's keep track of their shipping address. Well, that's how you would do things in a traditional relational database, but in a historical model, you don't want to do that. That's because names change. Customers move and they might change their address. So when those things happen, you would want to go back and update this record. In a historical model, updates are not allowed. So we're going to have to come up with some other pattern that we can use to keep track of mutable properties like names and addresses. In our next video, we're going to be talking about just that pattern. So come on back and let's talk about mutable properties.